ahead and introduce Anne. She also is active with the Metro Tree Advisory Committee, like Meg, and she is a water resource engineer, which really impresses me because we need more people like her. She's worked for over 30 years with stream monitoring and working for water quality. And in her retirement, and somewhat recent retirement, I think the love of trees and wildlife has taken a high role in her life, and just fascinates me that she really got interested in taking a information from the well, it's from the University of Tennessee, and making it into a practical companion when you're out hiking. I did this, and someone asked me if I'm going to stop at every oak tree that I see, which I wasn't planning on it, but that was an idea that they gave me. But I really am thankful for her, because our oak trees, as she'll probably tell you, is our national champion tree. It's our tree, and they provide so much in our food web, as far as the birds and the moths and the butterflies, and how they all help to make our environment more healthy and more sustainable. So I'm so glad, Anne, that you could be here today.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be tree talking today about oaks. And thank you for seeing how this would fit into the format of Tree Talk. You really helped me frame this talk. So I have to make the disclaimer. I'm not a tree expert. I'm a tree fan. I'm someone who really recognizes and appreciates oak trees. My training is as a water resources engineer. I worked for almost 35 years with the US Geological Survey. My job was to analyze watershed and stream data, and to try to get a better understanding of floods and pollution in Tennessee streams. And yes, as Meg pointed out, there is very strong connection between trees and water quality, but I'm not gonna talk about that today unless there's some time at the end. This is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start by answering the question, why oak trees? Why am I so focused on them? There's been a lot of buzz about oak trees in the last few years, and we're just starting to recognize how important they are, what an important resource they are in Tennessee and the nation. Um, and then I'm going to talk about recognizing oak trees in the other sense of the word recognizing, and that is a flashcard series that I'm glad that Jennifer had hers. Here it is, a flashcard series that is based on a document by UT professors that can help you identify and recognize oak trees. And then finally, I'm going to end up by talking about Nashville, about some cool facts about Nashville trees. Yeah, why should we love oaks? And as it turns out, we do all love oaks. Americans really love oaks. In a contest that was run by the National Arbor Day Foundation in 2001, oaks won hands down. And then Congress made it official in 2004 by passing a bill. And in that bill, Congress writes, Americans love oaks because the oak tree represents the fundamental characteristics of this great nation: strength, endurance, and beauty. And the bill also goes on to say the oak tree has played a key role in many specific historic monuments in our nation's history. And then they go on to mention a few great oak moments in history. And it's really cool. I would recommend that as reading to someone who's a fan of American history and a fan of oaks. The other reason to love oaks is that they are, as Jennifer pointed out, they are ecosystem superheroes. And biologists, of course, have known this for years, but Some of us, including myself, have just recently become aware of how important they are in food webs. They really are a standout compared to every other kind of tree, every other genera of tree. I've got showing Douglas Tallamy's latest book, The Nature of Oaks, which just came out this year. It's hot off the press. And as he says, oaks, well, not only do they produce all the acorns that fuel our wildlife, our mammal wildlife, but they also support more caterpillars than any other plant genera. And caterpillars are what fuel terrestrial food webs for wildlife. So super important from that standpoint. And oaks are the dominant trees around here in Tennessee. We have 70% of our forest types are oak hickory forests, and then oak pine and oak gum cypress make up another 10%, so that's 80%. Does anyone want to take a guess as to which particular oak species is the most plentiful in Tennessee forests? You can, I'm going to put the list up here in a minute, but if anybody wants to put something in the chat, maybe guess what you think
We had a
might be
white oak
well,
offered.
okay, white oak is very good.
There you go.
White oak is the most plentiful tree. In terms of mass, I should say, because actually red maple is most plentiful if you are counting numbers of individuals. But if you're looking at mass, white oak is the top, and then tulip poplar, our state tree, chestnut oak, high up there, scarlet oak, black, and northern red oak. So when you're looking at a forested hillside and seeing this great mass of leaves, you're really looking at mostly oaks. Pretty cool. Another reason to get excited about oaks is that the high diversity of oaks that we have here in Tennessee. There are 58, by some counts, there are 58 species of oaks native to North America, and over a third of those are native to Tennessee. And you can see this map shows you there's some real pockets of high diversity in Kentucky and in Middle and West Tennessee and Alabama, Georgia. So that's another blessing of oaks for Tennessee. But it's a blessing, but it's also a challenge because when you have 20 species of oaks to try to identify, it can be tricky to identify them. It can be tricky to remember what is unique about each particular oak species. For example, if you're taking a walk in a middle Tennessee forest up on the ridge, you come across a tree that has leaves that look like a chestnut tree, and you say, "Oh, that's a chestnut oak." But wait, there is another tree that also grows on upland areas, the same kind of habitat, and that's the chinkapin oak. Very hard to tell the difference. And both of them are actually named for their resemblance to American chestnut leaves. Chinkapin is the Algonquin name for chestnut. So both of them are named because their leaves look so much like chestnut oak. So as I was Googling, searching for ways to help distinguish between chestnut oak and chinkapin oak, I came across this great resource published by 3 professors in the UT Department of Forestry about 15 years ago. I really like their approach because they what they call the brief recognizable features approach, because they, in their descriptions and their illustrations, they really key in on the characteristics that are going to help you most quickly identify which Tennessee native oak you're looking at. And they have great markings to help you look for those features. It's sort of like the Peterson guide to confusing fall warblers. This is the guide to confusing oak trees in Tennessee. Because yeah, it's just oak trees, it's just Tennessee, so it's just exactly what I wanted. But I did want to also have a tool that would help me not just identify, not just look up and identify, but also it would help me memorize what those features are and really fasten in my memory once I've looked up a tree, like, okay, now I've got it. And I came up with the idea of turning these into flashcards. Oh, I'm sorry. I let me back up for a minute here. Let me show you what the UT professors tell us to hone in on when we're trying to distinguish between a chestnut oak and a chinkapin oak. We need to look very carefully at the margin of the leaves. The chestnut oak has shallow and rounded teeth. The chinkapin oak here has more curved teeth, sort of this series of convex and concave curves, kind of sawtooth, and it has a sharp tip at the end of each of those teeth. So that's a great way to tell the difference. It's just good to have that in your mind. In the descriptions, they also point out that you can look for the underside of the chestnut oak being pubescent, which means has short, fine hairs. So my idea to get these things in my memory was to rearrange these into to flashcards. You know, thinking of how we memorize things for tests in school days. So I did some cutting and pasting. I put all the graphics on one side of a sheet with the brief recognizable features, and then on the back side the text that goes along with it. So you'd look at those features, you'd try to bring to mind what oak that was, and then you can look on the back side and see if you were right. Then so the this PDF document that's the rearranged version of the UT document is now available for anyone to use, thanks to these professors and UT Department of Communications. They have said it's fine for us to distribute this information as long as it's being used for nonprofit and for educational purposes. So I suggest printing them out on cardstock paper. They can be printed in black and white. This is showing some color, but really that's the only page with color. It's fine in black and white. So you print them out and you cut them into 4 different cards, each page 4 different cards. And if you want to take them in the field with you to help you identify, you can also laminate them and bind them. And I know a couple of people that are using them to help identify oaks. So I'm gonna, let's see how we're doing on time. I'm gonna walk you through some of the cool things that are in this guide. One of them is this matrix of the 20 different species native to Tennessee. And the first thing you want to do when you're looking at an oak is decide whether it's the left-hand side, a red oak, or on the right-hand side, white oak. And well, actually back up. The first thing you have to do is figure out you're looking at an oak. But I'm not gonna, I mean, if you see acorns on the ground, that's a great sign. Let's just assume you know it's an oak. And so the first thing is to answer the question, do the leaves have bristles on their tips? Bristles are a stiff, short hair it's actually the continuation of the leaf vein that goes past the margin of the leaf. So if you have bristle tips, if you have a leaf that has bristle tips, it's a red oak. If not, it's a white oak. These names can be confusing because the names of these two broad categories really have to do with in the furniture and the flooring industry. The oaks that happen to be bristle tipped are also the ones that happen to have the red oak look to their wood. And then, white oak has the lighter color. And then there's also a species called white oak. So that's a confusing thing for people at first. But anyway, you can see once you've decided whether it's red or white, you've kind of cut in half the number of species that you have to think about when you're identifying a tree. Then there's this other broad question you can answer, which is the oak growing in an upland area, the top of a ridge, or do you find it in a bottomland valley floor area where the soil is going to be a little wetter? And so if you are lucky enough to be looking at a round-tipped leaf on a ridge, you've just narrowed down your possibilities to just 4 trees. It's most likely one of these 4 trees. And they're pretty easy to tell apart. The chestnut and chinkapin I went over, but we can do that. So that's kind of cool. The story with red oaks, it's a little trickier. There's more of them, and there are several of them. For example, the black oak and the scarlet oak that are really hard to tell apart just based on the leaves. In fact, it's hard for experts to tell them apart, and you have to bring in another distinguishing feature, the acorn. And so what the flashcard, what the document shows you is if you can find these, if you look at the scarlet oak, the one on the right is the scarlet oak, and you can see these concentric rings on the tip of the acorn in that lower right, then it's a scarlet oak. And the black oak also has a particular characteristic to its acorn. The scales at the top of the acorn cup are loose, and so it gives it a little fringy look, which only black oaks have. So that helps. But it's not all splitting hairs when you identify oaks. Some of the species are unique and unforgettable. I think the first time you really identify a bur oak, you'll never forget it because it doesn't look like any other oak. It's got a huge leaf, and in particular, this deep sinus halfway up the leaf is very characteristic on most leaves. You don't always see that. It has a very unique acorn with a very hairy fringe around the top of the cup. And in fact, its name also comes from a similarity to the chestnut, because the acorn of the bur oak looks like the burr of the chestnut tree, the American chestnut tree. Other cool things about it, it's the only tree in Middle Tennessee that resurrection fern grows on. And it only will grow on bur oaks that are more than 220 years old, according to Randy Allen. So you're looking at an old tree when you see a resurrection fern on it. And if you've never seen that, I would recommend going to the Harpeth River Greenway, the Woolwine Trail that leads off from the parking lot on Highway 100. And there's just a gorgeous oak there, bur oak. And so to wind up here in Nashville, I've had fun looking through records online of the world's biggest oak trees, and making notes of where they are. Driving around, and you can tell I'm retired because I'm driving around looking at trees. So this bur oak on Brick Church Pike is the 4th largest oak tree in the world. According to this website, monumentaltrees.com, that's they keep records of trees throughout the world. Another record here in Nashville is the willow oak that's on Leland Lane. It's the 3rd largest willow oak in the world. You can find the actual address of these yards, and if you're interested in drive by. This is Nashville's. This is the third largest white oak in the world on Franklin Road. And I think the white oak is my favorite tree, just because of this amazing shape that it develops when it grows in an open space like this, and the fall color is gorgeous. Um, and so Nashville has the third largest white oak. The fourth and fifth largest white oaks in the world are also in Middle Tennessee. They're in McMinnville. So I'm really curious why Nashville is blessed with yet something else regarding oaks is that we seem to have all these record oaks, and um, I don't know why that is. I'm curious about it. Is it because there are just a lot of people here tuned into this and that want to go out and measure these trees and put them in this database, or is there some reason why? It's just a question I think is fascinating, and I would like to know more. And I'll stop there so we have some time for questions.
Gosh, Ann, that was so fascinating. Learned so much, and I can see why the white oak in particular, is your favorite tree. It's one of my favorite too. It just has a certain distinction about it that I'm attracted to. Sharon, do we have any questions?
We have a couple of questions. Why are hackberries, or why were hackberries so popular in the 50s and 60s when homes were being built?
Well, it's hard to know what the industry offered at that time back then. And I think a lot of the hackberries that we see today were planted by birds, not by the landscape companies. But if a couple of years ago, well, about 8 years ago, we had a spot inventory in East Nashville, and the hackberry was the #1 tree. So in some respects, I know that there can be pesky and they can split a little bit on the branches coming down, but without the hackberry, we would have much less of a tree canopy in Nashville. And we've benefited from that. The birds have benefited from it for generations. I think a lot of the ones significant ones are coming down now, whether it's the wind, tornado, and people, of course, will not be planting them back. So it's going to change our canopy forest in the next generation or so. Anne or Meg, do you have a thought on hackberries?
It's a native tree, and you're right, Jennifer, they're berries, right? Which really helps birds over the winter. I love hackberries far away from houses or structures. If they're not near anything that is going to potentially harm, a structure or an individual, they're so great at a distance. I think there's, I don't think there's many good things about Bradford pears, but I do think there's some good things about hackberries. I know it's controversial to say.
And do you have a thought?
I didn't used to love hackberries, but I do now, because when you're reading about which trees support caterpillars and support the food web for our wildlife, hackberries are really high up there on the list. We should show them some love.
Okay, next.
Excellent. Here's the next question. What are the details of the new tree ordinance that was just passed in Metro Nashville?
That's a lot of details. It has a lot to do with heritage tree categories, changing the tree density units for commercial properties. And I've been thinking about having a tree talk on that, because and there's some actual other ordinances I'm going through Metro City Council as we speak as well. And so I think that just needs to be a whole presentation to talk about that. But, we're even working on how much soil is needed for trees in the urban setting, street trees, soil volume. One of the other things that came up, we did pass, it was a landscape architect needs to stamp certain types of designs that are submitted. but it's all towards helping us to sustain our urban forest. So we've got residential code that talks about, planting a tree every 30 feet thereof in front of residential homes. We have the downtown code that has a segment on trees, and then we have our code for commercial development. So I think that's what we'll do, is just wait for a whole presentation on that.
That's really interesting. All right. So how do you root a tree by its acorn?
Anne, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. What was the question again? How do you
root a tree by its acorn?
How do you?
How do you what a tree? Sorry.
How do you grow a tree? I guess I should say.
Oh, yeah, I see. I can't really answer that. I haven't tried to do that.
So squirrels do a lot of that for us, and when they plant them, but you can stratify acorns too. And each tree species has the amount of time that they're asked, to stratify that species. And so those are some of the techniques. I mean, you can just plant it. When I've done it in the past, I've done it in a small container, and some roots, acorns respond to, like the giant sequoias, let's say, it has to have a fire at a high temperature before it's going to start to root. So each tree species has their own preference on how do you stratify it, and then how do you plant it. But the squirrels seem to be very successful.
Well, and we love squirrels.
Right.
All right, that is all of our questions.
Okay.
Any parting thoughts?
Anne, I would like to share one more slide. If you would undo your screen and I'll share mine.
I will do that for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good, Jennifer.
And the last slide I would like to show is something on our next webinar that's actually this Thursday. It's on managing the emerald ash borer epidemic in Nashville. It's Thursday this week at 12 noon. And this is something that's very, very important. And we've been talking about this for a couple of years, but this growing season, we're going to start seeing a lot of dieback from our ash trees. So we need people that are, can become advocates for their neighborhoods to tell their neighbors about why it's so important to manage your ash trees. So because they can become very hazardous. And so this is a seminar or webinar that we've been putting on, the Tree Advisory Committee has, and you can go to trees.nashville.gov and download our brochure on this that we've had out for quite a while. And then I just want to remind everyone again that the National Arbor Day is the last Friday in April. We had our Tennessee Arbor Day is the first Friday of March. And again, the Nashville Tree Foundation at Earth Day in Centennial Park from 11 to 6 this Saturday will be giving away 500 3-gallon container trees. And these will be a great way for you to replenish our tree canopy in Nashville, and then care for your tree, and then plot it with the Root Nashville tree plotter. And those are all important things that you can do as a citizen. And we want to thank you again, and then see you on Thursday.
Thanks a lot, everyone. And we will see you later this week. Thank you, Jennifer and Meg and Ann.
Yes, thank you, Anne and Meg.